a lot of the other interviews with him are about the interviewer showing basically I'm representing society and I'm going to condemn you, Charles Manson. And it's like a little ritual, hate moment, like in 1984. Let me show you how terrible you are. Do all your greatest hits of being evil and I'll pretend to be good. And I didn't want to do that.
All right, we are being joined today by Nikolas Schreck, who had the distinct, I guess it's privilege, I don't know what you want to call it, but has had a relationship with Charles Manson and is a very well-respected author about the events of that night, but overall, who and what Charles Manson was. How are you doing today?
Pleasure to be here. Thank you, Eric, for inviting me.
Well, thank you very much for coming in. I'm going to open with the two questions that I know are so common. You actually address them in your book, the Manson File, which is not a lightweight volume, folks.
I don't tend to do lightweight volumes. I approach things exhaustively and in infinite detail, because especially with a subject like this that has been obfuscated and lied about so much, it's crucial to debunk the lies and the myths and explain exactly what happened. So yeah, this is not light reading. It's not a page turning true crime book. It's an exhaustive encyclopedia of this subject.
And it is. There's so many details, so much information, photographs, everything is all tied up in here. I noticed a chapter where you discussed this was called "My Life with the Thrill Kill Cult," who happens to be a band that I am a huge fan of. Back in the 90s, I haven't really followed them since.
They took their name from an article which was called "My Life with the Thrill Kill Cult." So that's what I'm aware of the band, but I was actually citing the sensational article which came out early on in the media frenzy about the murders. And of course, the idea that they were a thrill kill cult is already inherently wrong, implying that there was no motive when in fact there was a motive.
Oh, excellent. So I want to get into that and clear it up because there's so many different ways this has been documented. Obviously, Helter Skelter being the 800-pound gorilla in the room.
Right.
But lately, Tom O'Neill's Chaos has really made a lot of waves itself.
Right.
From 2018 on or something like that.
Yeah.
But how did you actually meet Charles Manson?
Right. Well, as I explain in that chapter, because they are such commonly asked questions, I tried to be very detailed in answering that. The way that I met him was in 1985. You may recall that Henry Rollins of SST Records was going to put out a recording of Manson, an actual album on SST Records, which would have been vaguely mainstream release of Charlie's music. And SST got so many death threats and problems about it, so much bad publicity, they got cold feet and backed off. And Radio Werewolf, my band, had just started that year. And I wrote to Charles, saying, I'm a musician. I have nothing to lose and nothing to fear, and I'd be happy to put out the album if Rollins can. And from there, we connected as fellow musicians, really. And I think if we developed a rapport, it's because I didn't approach him based on the criminal background that is the main thing people spoke about, but as a musician who respected and actually admired his music and wanted to put out that album. As it came out, we never did put out that album, but he sent me immediately on a wild goose chase all around California, looking for other obscure cassettes that he'd smuggled out of prison and little snippets of tape that he thought were superior to the album because he wanted to put out his music. And in the process, I met a lot of people. I should say not in the process, the church, but in the process.
Oh, good point.
Because people accused me of being in the process. So in the process of doing that, I met many of his former Confederates and associates and got, ex-cons, people, survivors from his commune, friends of his, and got to understand his life. And then very quickly we developed a rapport. I visited him behind glass at San Quentin. And then we set up, what happened is that, the book Manson in His Own Words by Newell Emmons, which came out in 86, I think, or maybe 87. He had been anticipating that he would like that book. He'd been cooperating with Emmons for some time. Emmons had been interviewing him for like 7, 8 years. And when it came out, Charlie absolutely detested it because the editors, Grove Press, had mangled what he said and smoothed it out to the point that it didn't even sound like him. And according to Charlie, Emmons had included a lot of sensational information from other books that Charlie didn't say. It was complicated. And I've explained this before and I explain it in the book. And this is very Charlie Manson. Only shortly after getting to know him in a phone call, he said to me, he knew exactly where Newell Emmons was going to be appearing at an interview in Channel 5 here in Los Angeles, where I happen to be at the moment. And he said, you go down there to Channel 5 and you tell Newell Emmons Charlie Manson's angry at him. And you do this and you do that. And that he was immediately being Manson-esque. And I went down there and Newell was very affable and said, oh, Charlie's always been like that since I know him. He's always threatening things. And we got along fine. And I got to know Newell. But Charlie wanted to do an antidote to Manson in his own words. And so he said, you're a writer, because I had sent him a pamphlet that I'd made for the Werewolf Order or Radio Werewolf, which was like a culling of some of his philosophical insights. And he liked that. And he said, well, why don't you make really Manson in his own words? Why don't you write a book that is that? And that turned into the first Manson File in 1988. Then we got the idea of doing a interview with him that would also have an impromptu concert where he would take his guitar. Again, my main focus with him was his music and his creative side. And as I've said to him in a tape you can hear on my YouTube channel, I said I was drawn to his creativity, not his destruction.
So what I want to do here is I don't really want to sit and ask you questions that you've probably heard a million times before. I just want to talk about a few topics and let you reflect on them.
Well, see, the way I communicate is
Rather than do the GA.
the way I communicate is in music. It's like to know someone. Start in the fingertips. You can know me in my fingers. You can know me in my hands. You can know me in my arms. In other words, I'm something inside that goes beyond words. Words, blah, 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 they're a bunch of biscuit. That's what they teach you in school.
So the Manson File, he cooperated with me, giving me obscure writings he had done to print, to show what he really believed, as opposed to the sensational way he had been reported in the media. And that was very successful. So on the 20th anniversary of the murders, which was 1989, I released my film Charles Manson Superstar, which included an interview with him, in which he comes as close to being the person I actually knew, the actual person who's not playing this Charles Manson character that Charlie tended to play. He's still playing it up a bit, but I think it does a pretty admirable job of showing who he was rather than the way the media presented him. So,
and himself, in fairness, he was playing a character too. So didn't he feed into that a little bit?
Oh, he was absolutely playing a character, but I'm saying, I think because of our rapport and because I wasn't going in there a hot seat interviewer to shake the bear's cage, which is what most, journalists so-called did with him, and we spoke to each other with mutual respect, I think it showed much more of the actual personality of Charlie. And I'm
an interviewer myself, and I'm curious. I actually like the process angle of it. Like it sounds like you built a friendship, so wasn't a straight out interview. But stylistically, when you went in to interview him, did you just kind of just go in like ears open, no judgment, if you will, just and let him talk it out to maybe develop or find more of the real Charlie Manson over
Absolutely. No,
time?
I had some questions loosely in mind, but I wanted to have a conversation, and I really didn't want to make it. A lot of the other interviews with him are about the interviewer showing, basically, I'm representing society, and I'm going to condemn you, Charles Manson, and it's like a little ritual um, hate moment, like in
Mhm.
1984. Let me show you how terrible you are. Do all your greatest hits of being evil, and I'll pretend to be good. And I didn't want to do that. So I just wanted to give him room to speak once and for all, uncensored, not editing what he said, not twisting it. And I sort of receded to the background and just gave him, show that that he can trust me to try to report what he said accurately. And that's why we continued to work together for years. And in the final version of the Manson File, which there have now been 3 copies of, and actually 5 publications of, because of its troubled and very bizarre history, which I can talk to you a bit about. He trusted me and opened up in a way that I don't really think he did with many people. And I never was a yes man to him, but I also
Hmm.
was never, I never really challenged him like other journalists did. So I gave him room to be himself. And over time, and he had trust issues galore. Winning that over was difficult, but he opened up about things he'd never spoken about because I think he saw I was not judging, but really was trying to get the facts right. And that was sometimes difficult for him to grasp because I'd ask very detailed, specific questions, which I'm sure reminded him of a cop or a prosecutor.
Mhm.
But I think he eventually understood my goal was truth and not judgment.
Now, one of the weird things about the Manson case is this is literally a guy known as the worst mass murderer, biggest name out there. But I don't know that he actually killed anybody himself or with his own hand.
Right.
Correct me if I'm
Right.
wrong on that.
Well, yeah, I think the average person on the street, I mean, one of the enigmas of the case is the actual killer, Charles Tex Watson, is a name that is practically unknown. The guy
Right.
who did all the stabbing, and as far as I'm concerned, the guy who had the motive to do these killings is unknown. In popular culture imagines Charlie and the 3 girls, went up there. And of course, he wasn't there during the murders that he is famous for. Um, Charlie had said to me that he had killed people, but not those
Mhm.
people. And I point out in the book a very important part of his early history. In 1960, he was on the lam for a prostitution charge in Laredo, Texas. He crossed the border into Mexico and hid out there. And he claimed there,
He was the prostitute in
no,
the church.
he was pimping. He was,
Oh, okay, okay, okay.
yeah, he
Thank you.
had he
I
had a
just want to know.
small stable of 2 whores, and he brought them to Laredo and New
Okay.
Mexico, and so he skipped the border, and he went into Mexico City, which I relate this whole adventure in my book, and he
Mhm.
claimed several times that he got involved in narcotics trafficking there, something to do with cocaine from Miami into Mexico. I'm not quite sure, something to do with Cuba, but specific enough, he clearly was involved in some sort of drug dealing activity in Mexico. And he said a few times he left a few people dead on the beach, shot them, and he also claimed to have been arrested in Mexico for suspected murder of a French national. Now, I don't know any further details about that. I got in touch with the very chaotic Mexican police, whose files you can imagine are just as immaculate as you would suspect.
Perfect.
Yeah, but I would like to know more about that. But I don't think he was bragging or anything because he was very matter of fact. So
Mhm.
it's not that he was a nice guy and he wasn't capable of killing people, but he wasn't a serial killer. He was a criminal who, according to him, had shot or killed some people in a drug related thing. And he also admitted to me that he had done what is called the institutional killing, which means in prison, there are certain protocols and rules. If you catch someone alone who's a snitch, a child, and various other infractions to the criminal code, you are obliged to kill them, or so he claimed. And so he said he killed some other prisoner at some point in his prison career. I don't know when exactly. And he told other people I know that too. Now, when we get to the Tate LaBianca thing, what did he do exactly? What, if we get to the specifics of the crimes
Let's step back then and go, well, let's just talk about what actually happened. What led up to the events, and then what actually happened in the events, and back up a step and do that.
The Bernard Crow incident is when Tex Watson ripped off this black drug dealer named Lotsapapa, or Bernard Crow, who happened to be well known to the music and movie community that Charlie was involved with. And so, to make a long story short, he was lured into Rosina Kroner, who was the girlfriend of Tex Watson, who was a crime partner of Bernard Crow. He was lured into her apartment by a threat. Bernard Crow had called the ranch and said, if I don't get my money back, which is about $2,000 or $2,500 that Tex Watson had stolen from him, had claimed.
That's a lot of money back then.
A lot. Give me that money and I'll go bring you some weed. And Tex just disappeared, which is almost suicidally crazy. But he did that and he got away with it. And Charlie went back, had a confrontation with Bernard Crow, and shot him and left him for dead. And that was the beginning, though there were other crimes before that, which I get into in the book, that were sort of part of this succession of crimes. That really set the ball rolling, because then Charlie then felt that he didn't know that the guy survived. So he shot him and left him for dead. And he believed and became harrowed by the idea that he had shot someone. And that led to a lot of the complications that came later. So the idea that Charlie, was a coward who would not, who sent girls in to do the dirty work is not true. He was a dangerous person who was willing to go over and shoot someone. He did that immediately. The other interesting thing about that is this was in summer of '69. According to Bugliosi and the public legend, Manson was, giving assassin training, and the commune was ready to kill. And, they had been turned into highly trained zombie commando assassins going out to start. And yet, on a night when he's going to confront a black drug dealer, he could only find one guy to go with him. Why didn't he send out his kill squad to do that? It kind of already begins to debunk this idea that this commune was, Murder Incorporated for hippies. It really wasn't.
So what was it? I'm not to sidetrack. What would you call that commune? What was there? Was he a cult leader with people under sway or not?
No, I would not say by any standard that it was a cult. It was a very disorganized. It was like a billion other communes in the '60s. There are many others that were exactly like that. Was he a charismatic individual? Was he manipulative? Absolutely. But, so were many other commune leaders, but it was much less organized. It didn't have a particular ideology. People came and went. There was freedom to it. It was not Jonestown, in California. It was nothing like that. And I would say the most accurate description of it was in one of the few scholarly studies of the commune that happened before the murders, before people had any real idea of what hadn't been telegraphed, what they should believe about this thing, was an article that characterized the commune as a group marriage. And I would say that's the most accurate thing. It was a relationship between Charlie and his girlfriend and these girls in the commune with a few male hangers on. That's really what it was. It was a group marriage, I think is accurate to say. Was Charlie domineering and manipulative and obviously the oldest person there? And was he a control freak who liked things done the way he liked? Yes. But was it a cult? Not by any true standard. It was a commune, and also it was a gang. I mean, they were stealing. They were auto theft and credit card theft, petty crimes like that, and of course drug dealing.
Now, is it possible? And I'm projecting into this. I'm not going to make a judgment per se, but could it be that after the arrests and everything and going into the trial, that maybe they played it up a bit?
Oh, yeah.
Like then it was like it became the cult after the fact. Like it wasn't necessarily,
Yeah.
but they're like, "Ooh, we get more attention if we sing together and do mark ourselves up and things like that."
No, well, I think that's very astute. This whole thing is very much a Hollywood, Los Angeles story about. You have to look at this in the proper context. And I do want to get back to the crimes.
Absolutely.
But
Yeah.
we'll take a digression over here, and then we'll go back.
Thank you.
So Charlie was a musician, and the commune was drawn to him because of his music. These girls,
Groupies, almost.
yeah, it's an entourage. There are plenty of guys in Los Angeles right now that have an entourage of women around them because they assume they're going to be, the next big thing tomorrow. And that's very much what Charlie was not that different than a lot of other people in Los Angeles at that time. Frank Zappa had a bunch of people around him. There were many entourage groups. In fact, it's a phenomenon of the 60s. The group of people around Andy Warhol in New York. Let's say if Joe D'Alessandro had killed Lou Reed over a heroin deal,
Yeah.
it would become the Warhol murders.
True.
He was part of a phenomenon of the male, with his male musician with an entourage of young admirers. And I think it's really exaggerated to say that it was a hell of a lot. Did they have spiritual beliefs? Were they sincere about their spiritual beliefs? Yes, but they weren't 3 million miles away from what thousands of other hippies were doing at that time. They weren't so tremendously unique. But to answer your question, when they got this media attention, a lot of these were naive young women with not a hell of a lot of identity or substance. And I think to suddenly be thrown into the media spotlight, I think they sort of became what the media presented themselves as. And certainly, and I've said this to Charlie, his behavior during the court and all this, the singing together, the going out on the sidewalk, the X's on their head, it fit into what Bugliosi was saying perfectly. Even if Bugliosi wasn't lying and holding this kangaroo court, the jury would have every reason to think, well, this looks like a dangerous cult. And they played it up, absolutely. And they continued to for years to come. I mean, but they weren't that. They became that. And sort of minor sub issue to that. Really, in the mid 70s, Charlie formed a group in prison called the Order of the Rainbow, which was with Lynette Fromm and Sandra
Right after
Good.
Gerald Ford.
Yes, and that was really a cult. I mean, people ignore this. The commune wasn't even called the family. That's a media construct. They didn't really call themselves anything. It was a loose link group.
Well, it wasn't even a compound; it was a ranch. That's another one.
It was a bunch of people foraging on the ranch and living at various places, and they came and went. It wasn't a strict. It wasn't even really as much of a commune as other communes were. But the thing is that it wasn't that different than everything else that was going on in the 60s, I think. But
I just wanted to cover that because I think that the fabric and the mentality of the people involved is very relevant, especially like when they were this way, when they weren't that way, because of all the narratives. So now we'll jump back to.
They did have rhetoric, like Charlie was their father. They certainly believed he was a Christ-like figure and all of that, but it just was too loose and ragtag and unorganized to be considered a cult per se. And the fact is, the one of the 3,000 distortions of these things that these murders had something to do with cult-like or ritual activity, whereas they were simply criminal actions of criminals doing what criminals do. And this is very hard to clear up. The myth that they acted in some bizarre cult-like way. They didn't. They were doing what criminals do, and I want to get into that. But to
Yeah, for
return
sure.
briefly to your question about his guilt or lack thereof for the murders, so he did shoot Bernard Crowe. He was
Okay.
more than capable of shooting someone. Then Bobby Beausoleil, an associate of his, who was not really part of the commune per se, but who was a close associate, about another drug deal because the Straight Satan Motorcycle Club in Venice, California, were having a 10th anniversary celebration, and they wanted to get mescaline, which was at that time legal, by the way. It was not yet a Class A narcotic.
Right.
Bobby Beausoleil went to Gary Hinman, who was a former roommate and friend of his, an amateur maker of mescaline and other drugs, and he bought a pretty large amount, and something was wrong with this mix of mescaline. And he was not a professional chemist. He was doing it, like a hobby practically. He wasn't a major drug dealer, as we will get to, like with Jay Sebring and Wojtek Frykowski. He was just, a sincere hippie making a little extra money with doing something he thought was enlightening people with psychedelics. He wasn't really a criminal, I wouldn't say. And so Bobby Beausoleil killed him about a dispute about getting the money back that the bikers wanted for these drugs that were, in the terminology of the times, bunk. And so now Charlie went over there during the crime, and he mistakenly believed that Hinman was threatening Mary Brunner and Sadie Susan Atkins, who were there. And when Hinman opened the door, Charlie cut his ear and face with a cutlass, like one of these pirate cutlasses that was from the Straight Satan Biker Club. So again, he didn't murder anyone, but again, he acted violently, and he gave Gary Hinman what could have been a fatal wound, and Bobby Beausoleil killed him. But now technically, in California law at that time, if Charlie had a better lawyer, he still probably could have gotten off for that. But technically, if you wound someone and are at their home right before they get murdered, you are involved with their murder. Even if you were present.
And Beausoleil wasn't alone, right? Wasn't Atkins there with him?
He was Mary Brenner and Susan Atkins were there with him. And to a certain extent, they participated in smothering Gary Hinman while he was dying. And
it was brutal. I mean, I can't go into details because it's YouTube, but it was a brutal murder. They're not nice people.
No, nobody should ever say that these were nice people. That's for damn sure. But, it's a typical drug, murder. It had to do with drug dealing, and all of this is about money owed. It's very banal and typical.
It's very pedestrian.
It's extremely pedestrian. It's actually, if the real case was known at the time, I think it would not have become headline news. It's the lies about it that the media and Bugliosi and various other people spread to cover up what really happened that even made it a sensational news story. It's, some drug dealers killed some other drug dealers about money. It's boring. The facts. It's fascinating.
Well, a lot of those I think are, and I'm not trying to segue on it, but okay, I want to ask one question just to clear it up with everybody. In your opinion, then, Charles Manson is where he should have been. Is that a fair statement?
By his own admission, he never denied shooting Crowe, which he was never charged for, strangely, which is kind of bizarrely a racist thing. A black guy was actually shot by him, but they treated that like, well, he never was charged for a crime he would have served many years for. He admitted cutting Gary Hinman, and he admitted he should have served time for that. Now we'll get into the Cielo Drive thing. He wasn't present there, and as far as I'm concerned, he had almost nothing to do with the most famous crime he's known for. That was Tex Watson and Linda Kasabian's crime that Charlie got dragged into because he was this father figure of this loose-linked group. And we'll get into this a bit. Make himself culpable by going back to the crime scene and covering up what happened. Now, that wasn't revealed in court, but if they had known that, that would have made him guilty. If you go back to a crime scene and help your friends cover up the murder, you become
accessory after the fact, accessory to the murder.
Yeah, so if it were known that Manson had returned back to the crime scene at Cielo Drive, that would have made him genuinely culpable. But according to the evidence presented in court, which was extremely flimsy, and Linda Kasabian's lawyer, Gary Fleischman, even said that Charlie would have walked and he had a proper lawyer because there was so little incriminating evidence to connect him to the crime. I mean, that was Bugliosi's bizarre genius to invent this way of connecting him, even though he wasn't, as you mentioned early on, not present and not involved, and it wasn't even his crime. But so now with the LaBiancas, the next night, he did enter the house. According to what he told me, he took money from them, which he knew they would have, and brought the money to pay off the straight Satans who were extorting him in Venice, California, and that crime was a robbery, as Cielo Drive 2 was intended to be a robbery, but it went awry. So
did he know the LaBiancas?
He did not personally, but he walked in the house and he left very quickly. However, Susan Atkins was given first-degree murder for being in the car outside at that crime that she never even entered. So if you enter the house of somebody and they end up getting killed, you are culpable. But that's a technicality. He certainly didn't commit any murder that night. Now, so he admitted that he shot Bernard Crowe to me and many others. He never hid that. He admitted that he cut Gary Hinman near fatally. He admitted that he went back to the Cielo Drive crime scene. He certainly admitted that he went into the LaBiancas and took money from them, which makes you culpable. Now with Shorty Shea, who never gets as much attention, who was a guy who lived on the Spahn Ranch, who people remember as a stuntman, but really he was less of a stuntman than he too is a kind of shady criminal character involved in pornography, which is a deep aspect of what these crimes are all about, which I get into in the book. This porno ring and illegal mob manufacture and sales of pornography was a big part of the criminal activity behind all this. Anyway, Shorty Shea, kind of like Wojtek Frykowski in the literature, gets called a writer, although there's no proof that he ever wrote anything. Shorty Shea gets called a stuntman. He was killed at the Spahn Ranch, the last of this series of murders, and Charlie admitted it was like a gang killing. Tex Watson actually stabbed him to death and was never charged for that crime, but Charlie admitted he cut Shorty Shea. They all cut him, and that too makes you culpable of murder. And in fact, years later, when I was trying to get him a new trial, and we were making some progress with a lawyer, Charlie backed out of it because he feared that the Shorty Shea thing could get him a new death penalty because he did, so he sort of backed off from that. So when a lot of his fans and overly naive admirers try to make it sound like he was, totally innocent, that's certainly not true. He was a violent person who was more than capable of cutting, shooting, but he did not murder the people whose names he's associated with, nor, so, well, yeah, and he did believe he should have served time. He himself said, I should have served a certain amount of years, but not life imprisonment. And that is true. By any legal precedent, nobody would spend life imprisonment for what he actually did, as opposed to what he was falsely accused of doing, which is being the mastermind of a conspiracy to kill.
Is it true that he begged or asked not to be released from prison back in the 60s?
Yeah, in 1967, he was released from Terminal Island, and he admitted that, yeah, he said he said things like, I can't make it on the world outside. I don't want to be out in that madhouse. He definitely, it's in the official records that he
Mhm.
asked not to be let go. But a sort of mitigating factor there was that he later clarified that it was mostly he didn't want to be let out on probation. He wanted to be let out as a free man with no conditions. So I think he tended to exaggerate things a bit and make things a bit more dramatic than they are, but I think the truth is somewhere between those two. That he did genuinely have some apprehension of not wanting to be let out. He certainly was completely institutionalized after spending a whole life in prison, but there's that other factor that he explained in a little more sober conversation, that he wanted to be let out, under total freedom and not with these having to report to a probation officer, which was, which he did. He did report to a probation officer throughout the entire 3-year period of his freedom. So I think the truth.
While we're on that, and I hate to hijack it further, but it's like it's going with the flow. There are, questions like Tom O'Neill specifically brought a lot of these up, like, why was he a snitch during that time? Did
No,
he have connections with the CIA
no,
or anything else? And
no.
Tom O'Neill also described a very large bust that happened with like a whole stolen car ring deal.
Right.
The whole SWAT team went down, very dramatic thing. And
Yeah.
he was out the next day and
Right.
it just disappeared.
Right.
Can we look at any of those?
Yeah, well, I think maybe what reminded you of that when I said probation and that Charlie diligently.
Mhm,
Okay, a guy named Roger Smith was Charlie's probation officer in San Francisco in
mhm,
1967. O'Neill claims falsely that Smith only had one client, Charlie. He
mhm,
also implies a sinister connection because this guy, Jolyon West, was connected to the Haight Street Clinic. There is absolutely zero proof that Charlie Manson ever met Jolyon West. None. And yet, Tom spuriously makes this suggestion, insinuation, that because Jolyon West had a connection to the Haight Street Clinic and Roger
mhm.
Smith had a connection to it, that means that Charlie was part of some CIA MK Ultra brainwashing experiment. I say that is total 100% unmitigated bullshit. It's nonsense. It's a lie. Roger Smith, a very close friend of mine, and I will be including some of this information in my documentary, which I'm here filming in
Mm.
Los Angeles, that expands on the Manson file. And for people who can't read, we'll give them pictures that will help them to understand what's happening.
Hey, stop picking on me.
Right. I wasn't directing that to you personally, but so yeah, the thing is, Roger Smith absolutely denied what Tom O'Neill said, and he felt used and exploited by Tom O'Neill, as many people did, because Tom O'Neill took little bits of things and insinuated and implied and didn't give proper information. Charlie was not Roger Smith's only client. Um, Roger Smith was not involved in a CIA MK Ultra brainwashing experiment. And O'Neill doesn't understand Manson. He absolutely, and I've said this before. I spoke to Charlie for 30 years. O'Neill talked to him for 30 minutes. The main thing you get from reading Chaos, he does not know who the main subject of his book is, and therefore he extrapolates utter nonsense that has nothing to do with Charlie or these other people. I don't know why, but he, if you want to be polite, he filled in gaps with his own imagination. If you want to be not polite, he lied. Charlie was not involved in any MK Ultra anything, and there is zero proof that he was. So Roger Smith has denied that completely and furiously, angrily said, Tom O'Neill lied. I was not involved. And of course, in our conspiracy theory world, and Tom O'Neill has done this well, Well, of course he's going to deny it because he was a CIA mind control expert. So
Mhm.
you can't win once these conspiracies sink into people's minds. But I have given other detailed interviews in which I have refuted that the second part of chaos. Now I want to say in fairness, the first part of chaos has a lot of genuinely great research and information that Tom found. But what was it about? It was proving what I have always said, that Bugliosi was covering up the involvement of celebrities like Terry Melcher and others in the crimes. That he proved that Rudy Altabelli, the guy that owned Cielo Drive, and Bugliosi and these people were cajoled to lie in court, to perjure themselves, to present a different version of things. But it doesn't in any way support this. The later part of the book is sheer speculative nonsense. I don't think there's any CIA connection. And in fact, in my book, I make it clear if there was a CIA connection, it was not to Charlie and the commune, but to the Polish expat, Roman Polanski, Jerzy Kosinski, and for good reason. Again, not some sinister mind control thing. The CIA is, again, banality and pedestrian business. It's not like they
Mhm.
only concentrated on mind control. The involvement of the CIA in this case was simply keeping an eye on communist expats at the time during the Cold War. You had these Polish expatriates at Cielo Drive around Polanski. And definitely the CIA kept an eye on them. And in the case of Jerzy Kosinski, a friend of Polanski, who introduced Wojtek Frykowski to Abigail Folger, two of the victims, he was definitely a CIA asset. But a lot of Iron Curtain expatriates were happy to cooperate with the CIA, and the CIA used them to get information about the Soviet bloc. There's, again, nothing sinister about it.
You grew up in Germany, right?
No. I lived in Germany most of my adult life, but I didn't grow up here. I grew up
Oh, okay. Because
grew up
I
right
was going to
here.
say that there was a East-West German aspect of it, and I mean the Cold War
Oh yeah.
had
Well,
to
I'm
be in
very
your mind.
intimate with the whole details of the Cold War and espionage, and I go into detail in the Manson File. If you want to find a CIA connection, it's with the Polish expatriates. Wojtek Frykowski, who I believe is responsible for why these people got killed, Polanski's friend, he definitely had some sort of intelligence involvement. He had a very shady past, but that's not surprising. Anyone at the height of the Cold War, if you left an Iron Curtain country and came here, you could be suspected to be a defector, you could be a double agent. So it was completely in order that the intelligence community would keep an eye on you. But Charlie had absolutely nothing to do with the CIA. And I think this is the important point. To believe that nonsense that Tom O'Neill pushes, you have to think that there was some brainwashing involved in this case. You have to accept the idea that these kids were mind controlled by the evil hypnotist Manson. Well, I'm saying no such thing happened. They were criminals who, of their own volition, committed these crimes. Nobody was, this is accepting Bugliosi's bullshit that it was a cult and that Charlie had some kind of power over their minds. He was an ex-pimp. He was a very charming, charismatic pimp who knew how hard is it to control teenage girls to do anything.
On that note, though, did he know how to hypnotize? Did he do that? Was Danny Trejo
Danny
telling
Trejo,
the truth
Danny
about?
Trejo is talking sheer bullshit. I don't, that story sounds completely nonsensical.
And so some of the prisoners were going to take advantage of him because they'd take advantage of anybody that's small. And we found out that he could hypnotize you, so we let him sleep in front of our cell to make sure that nobody would hurt him. And he got us loaded on weed.
Um, I am doing an interview in this upcoming week for my documentary with a woman who was the daughter of a hypnotist, a very well-respected hypnotist and criminal, by the way, fascinating individual who Charlie told me was one of his best friends and one of the few people he sort of described as a mentor. I'm going to be interviewing her this, and I do get into some of this. He had a friend who was a hypnotist, but the thing is, he asked this friend to teach him hypnotism. He didn't, he was a charming, charismatic, manipulative person. He didn't need CIA to tell him how to get, and what, but you understand what I'm saying is, to accept the CIA MK Ultra thing, you have to believe there was brainwashing here. I'm saying there was no brainwashing. There was no, these crimes were committed by people of their own free will for typical criminal purposes. So I refute the idea that there was brainwashing. Therefore, MK Ultra. Oh, now, was MK Ultra a real thing? Was it a
Yes.
horrible, sinister activity? Absolutely, totally. But it had nothing to do with this case. And I think Tom O'Neill's um, trick is to insinuate and imply. If you really read that last section of Chaos carefully, there's not a scintilla of proof to connect it. It's all speculation. And I'm a problem with our conspiracy frenzied world, which I very much oppose these unfounded conspiracy theories, because there are real conspiracies, but they're limited. They're about powerful people covering up their crimes. They're not these huge social engineering plans that populist conspiracy theories imagine.
While we're on the conspiracy front, can we clear up another one?
Uh-huh.
And this is one that actually brought us together. You were introduced to me from a friend of mine, Manny Grossman,
Uh-huh.
who has covered Son of Sam extensively,
Right.
who I always thought was essentially a thug and a serial killer who, again, pedestrian.
Right.
And he's gone through a journey going from a Maury Terry, which was the Beyond Evil speculation,
I'm very aware of Maury
to this. Now,
Now,
okay. The Maury Terry, and if I'm not describing it accurately, please let me know. But essentially, he was stating that Berkowitz was part of a cult that was spun out of the Process Church, somehow in England, and it all circles around to Manson.
yeah.
And it sounds completely exaggerated, in my opinion. But
Yeah.
can you clear that up too?
Yeah,
Is
more-
Manson
more-
tied to him in
Yeah.
any way?
No, not in any way, shape, or form. The process I get into in great detail in my chapter, The Wizard in the Manson File. I refute any connection with the Process Church of the Final Judgment and Charlie. The only connection that there was that after when the trial was going on, two members of the Process Church visited Charlie to interview him for their magazine, The Process. That's it. And Charlie did it. Of course, for conspiracy theorists, that's enough to prove their idea. But no, in fact, the Process Church of the Final Judgment was connected to these crimes and to Manson by L. Ron Hubbard personally, who hated the Process Church because they were the leaders of them, the de Grimstons, were former Scientologists who, in the terminology of Scientology, were squirrels, which meant they broke away from Scientology and used Scientology techniques to create their own rival group, the Process Church of the Final Judgment. So what Hubbard and his wife did, because it was known in the newspapers in like 1970 that Charlie had some unofficial Scientology training in prison by a guy named Rainer Lamer, or Lamer Rainer, I forget which one. And so the media tried to connect Charlie to Scientology, and another member of the commune, Bruce Davis, was a Scientologist.
Mhm.
L. Ron Hubbard wanted to deflect any bad reputation vibes that would come from being connected to the Manson case. So what he did was Hubbard, his ethics committee, which was like his private secret police, smeared the Process Church of the Final Judgment by sending to London and Los Angeles newspapers, oh look, they have the same philosophy. Manson's definitely connected to the Process Church. And Scientology, this is typical Scientology tactics, to go after an enemy and destroy them with character assassination. So if people believe, like Maury Terry, that there was a process connection to Manson, which I'm saying there was absolutely none. Nobody, I've talked to so many people involved with this thing in the group. Not a single person even remembered who the process were. Bobby Beausoleil denied it. Um, you know, many people involved have said there was no connection. We never met these people. And there are so many ridiculous, really, frankly, this MK Ultra brainwashing thing is as ludicrous and stupid as Maury Terry's process connection. I want to just underscore this. It was banal and, to use your word, pedestrian criminal activity. It was involving criminals fighting criminals. And as Charlie said, gangsters are always killing other gangsters. And a statement he made that I think is very germane, which I quote in the book twice because I think it is so important and sums up the whole thing. He said, "Man, if that broad wasn't an actor, nobody would have been arrested, nobody would have busted, and you never would have heard of this thing. Because it was just an ordinary crime that was covered up with ridiculous hyperbole. And because of that hyperbole, other fantasists like O'Neill, like Maury Terry, and Ed Sanders certainly contributed to this nonsense with his book, The Family, which was the first one to introduce the occult factor to this, which is absolutely zero. He really began this connection with the process church, and Maury Terry took it off into a new, inane, absurd direction. But I want to say that, a lot of people that look at this case act like, well, we have to consider every option and all of these things are possible. No, some things are just sheerly easy to disprove and impossible. And there's a tendency to sort of naively accept, well, it could be the process church and MK Ultra and maybe the aliens. And, where do you end with this nonsense? So I have to be pretty severe and dogmatic. I believe that the research I have done, and I think it will continue to show conclusively, what we're dealing with here is, on one level, Los Angeles underworld, the mafia, which was never very cohesive here in LA. It never had the kind of cohesive organization that you would find in the East Coast or other American cities. The underworld here was conducting illegal pornography, narcotics trafficking, money laundering, and Charlie was at the bottom of the rung of this criminal activity. And what happened at Cielo Drive and at Waverly with the La Biancas, as I've said before, it was like a little curtain open that you could see into this criminal underworld. And the mafia themselves, through the agency of Sidney Korshak, who you will see is a prominent player in my book and who was one of the main mafia fixers in Hollywood. He was a guy who is said could make one phone call and cover up a scandal completely or make your career. He was a very powerful mafia player in Hollywood. The mafia themselves helped to cover up the crimes. The prosecution, through Bugliosi, Caballero, and Paul Caruso, the lawyers in the case, helped to cover up the crimes. The celebrities in Hollywood involved with this helped to cover up the crime. So this is a banal underworld series of killings that have to do with money and drugs that were then distorted by way of misdirection and deception to turn it into something completely different and to focus the attention on Manson and the commune rather, as I do in my book and which I'm continuing to do in my documentary, what were these nice innocent people at Cielo and Waverly doing that they got killed? Now, of course, then that, because of the cult of the victim that comes with this, then I am, victim shaming, or I'm somehow maligning the memories of, that's the easy way for people to avoid the uncomfortable conversation. Jay Sebring, one of the people killed at Cielo Drive, was a major drug dealer to the stars. He was the hairdresser to the stars, but that was a front for a very sophisticated drug dealing operation. Wojtek Frykowski, Roman Polanski's friend, who most people, that's like the least remembered footnote of if anyone even remembers his name. He was trying to corner the market on what was an early version of MDA or ecstasy, MDMA. And he would have been the first distributor of it in Hollywood through a series of Canadian criminals who gave him this. Abigail Folger, the heiress to the Folger coffee fortune, Frykowski was just like a leech and a layabout, a guy who couldn't get a job in Hollywood, who really just a total fuck up. And his girlfriend basically financed his drug dealing operation. And it comes down again to sheer banality. Wojtek Frykowski made a deal with Tex Watson and Linda Kasabian, who Linda Kasabian had stolen some money from her ex-husband's friend, Charlie Melton, like $5,000. And they put some of that money into buying or ordering MDA from Wojtek Frykowski, who was at Cielo Drive. These people knew each other. Charlie Manson knew Sharon Tate for 2 years, I'm sorry, from April 68 to August 69. He knew her. He was part of her social circle. These were not strangers to each other. Jay Sebring was the hairdresser for many of Charlie's friends, Jim Morrison, the Beach Boys. There's no way in the world that these people did not know.
Charlie knew Jim Morrison?
Yes, Charlie knew Jim Morrison, and Jim Morrison looked up to him as a bit of a mentor, actually. And hard to believe, but Charlie actually tried to sober him up because he was pretty horrified by how drunk he would get and how fucked up he would get. And yeah, Morrison looked up to Charlie as kind of an elder beatnik guide to being a true dissident and counterculture figure. So yeah, they knew each other, and Morrison was interviewed by the LAPD early on, right after the crimes, and I've not been able to find that report, but they knew each other at the Topanga Corral. They knew each other from Venice. They had a lot of connections. So, I mean, Charlie knew many people in the rock world that you'd be amazed. I only found out a few years ago, this is surreal, that he collaborated with Paul Williams, the pop singer-songwriter, on writing songs, even before he was involved with the Beach Boys. So, yeah.
It's funny. We were talking about the underground, LA, things like that. And I'm not saying that's related, but I'm just saying it reminds me of a later murder series, the Wonderland Murders. Is this a similar scenario?
I make that very clear early on in the book. Interestingly, Tex Watson, I will remind people, the main person who did these killings, lived on Wonderland at one point, which there's many things in this case where synchronicities and coincidences kind of point you to the truth. By the 80s, people weren't thinking about witches and occultism and cults, and it was reported as what it was. Was it for the Four on the Floor murders, as it was also called, the Wonderland murders, involved basically to do with Eddie Nash, or Nasrullah, who was a nightclub impresario here in Hollywood, and a drug dealing retribution. They went in and killed a bunch of people about drugs. That's exactly what happened at Cielo Drive. They are so amazingly similar that, of course, anyone with half a brain would see this is the same. This is a typical Los Angeles drug killing, and it happens all the time, everywhere, and it's just in the weird constellation of things in the 60s, it was easy. And with the media being very limited, with just a handful of newspapers, a few TV stations, it was easy to cover up. But by the 80s, with the John Holmes involvement in the Wonderland murders, it was clear.
All that
aspect. It's the same thing. It's about pornography. It's about drugs. And that's the blood of this city that I'm in at the moment, Los Angeles. Pornography, drugs, corruption, has-been celebrities and trying to make money with drugs. I mean, that's the everyday bread and butter of Los Angeles. And that's, both of these crimes should be seen as very similar.
Okay. Yeah,
also, the Cotton Club murders that Robert Evans was involved with. Are you aware of that?
I've heard of them, but I haven't really researched them.
Right. If you look up that too was a cocaine dealing movie-making murder of a guy named Roy Radin. And Bob Evans, who was directly involved in the cover-up of the Cielo Drive murders, a close friend of Polanski and the head of Paramount, was also a cocaine dealer. If you look at the Cotton Club and the Wonderland murders, that's the milieu which the Cielo Drive murders occurred in. Another thing which is tangentially related, the Bob Crane murder.
Oh, really?
Bob Crane had a direct through his associate had a direct connection to the store, the audio high class audio place that Steve Parent, one of the victims of Cielo Drive, and this, as you know, and maybe your viewers know, Bob Crane had this private porno fetish
autofocus.
Where he made privately made video pornography. Well, that's what Polanski and the people at Cielo Drive were doing. That's what Charlie was doing. There's a connection there. And this is part of the secret underworld of Hollywood. So, those are murders that are closer to what happened. And the discovery by the police of many pornography videos in Rudy Altabelli's guest house and at Cielo Drive is a big part of what was covered up here.
And I think Sharon Tate, was she involved in that too?
Yeah,
or no?
yeah, Sharon Polanski had a thing of filming her with other men, and many famous men were involved in this. And Hugh Hefner was involved with this. Hugh Hefner and his right-hand man in England, they collected what is called fame porn. They even went back to the 1920s and found pornography with Joan Crawford in it. So they went out of their way to collect all kinds of salacious pornography of celebrities. Hugh Hefner had a relationship with Sharon Tate even before she met Polanski. So this is, it gets into all of the underbelly of Hollywood's dark side. That's what this case is really about. There was a major porno ring run by the mafia. This involves blackmail, extortion, all kinds of things that people are not aware of that were covered up by the whole helter-skelter fantasy. But
now, I don't want to speculate, but I believe he said that he was in Rosemary's Baby or something. Does your father-in-law mix into any of this at all?
Only in Anton LaVey, who is the father of my ex-wife Zena. He made up the lie, which actually backfired on him, that he had been hired to play the devil in Rosemary's Baby by Roman Polanski. We interviewed Gene Kutowski, the best friend of Polanski. He totally denied that LaVey had anything to do with Rosemary's Baby. In fact, I proved that an actor named Clay Tanner, a Western actor, played the devil in Rosemary's Baby and is even credited as such. Anton LaVey was a habitual pathological liar who inserted himself into history wherever he could for publicity. So however, because he spread that lie, when the murders happened, a lot of idiots believed, oh, maybe these have something to do with Satanism or Rosemary's Baby. Now, on a spiritual and metaphysical level, there are weird things about Rosemary's Baby sort of prophesying the crimes.
Mhm.
But that gets into the supernatural level, not human associations and connections. Definitely, I believe that Roman Polanski's films, in some bizarre way, presaged and even predicted these crimes. And I get into that a bit in the book, but that's a complicated, abstract, and metaphysical consideration that leads us astray. But was there an actual connection of Satanism or occultism to these crimes? No. And I want to say, in case anyone out there's so much misinformation, you have to spend more time debunking it than even getting into the truth. A lot of people think Polanski was personally into occultism. He was not. Complete atheist, existentialist with absolutely zero interest in black magic or occultism.
But he was very much
happened,
into drugs and porn and women.
well, he not really into drugs, although, I print, well, actually I can show you in the Manson File. This is one of This is one of many things that you have to wonder, why is this not more widely known? And I've distributed this at lectures I've given. This is the FBI report saying that drugs were suspected of being sent from Southampton in England to Roman Polanski and Wojtek Frykowski at Cielo Drive. This is the FBI report saying that. Why? This is the first time this has been printed. Why? This is a blatant indication that the authorities knew very well what was going on. These kind of things are covered up. And so Polanski wasn't really that much into drugs, but definitely pornography. His associate, Wojtek Frykowski, and his wife's former and probably ongoing lover, Jay Sebring, were very much involved in narcotics trafficking. And as I point out in the book, there was a party at Roman Polanski's house, housewarming, when they moved in after Terry Melcher moved out, at which a drug dealer named Billy Doyle was present at this party. And Billy Doyle later was raped by Wojtek Frykowski at Cielo Drive as revenge for another drug deal burning. And this plays a part in the crimes in a way that people don't seem quite to grasp. So a month before August 69 and the Cielo Drive slaying, this Canadian drug dealer was raped in front of other people by Wojtek Frykowski as retaliation for a drug burn, humiliated. And then he was brought to Mama Cass's house. Mama Cass is also
Mamas and Papas, right?
of the Mamas and the Papas. She's very much involved in the milieu. She was a friend of Charlie Manson, of Frykowski, of Folger, of Tate. She is a major connection between the victims and the criminals. And so this guy, Billy Doyle, was at a Polanski party. He was thrown out. But why were these drug dealers hanging around with Polanski? People act like these were two different worlds. They were not. They absolutely weren't. So the important point about this Billy Doyle by Wojtek Frykowski, the way that the crime scene at Cielo Drive was set up was to make it look like Billy Doyle and his drug dealing Confederates had got back to seek revenge and kill the people. But that shows you how much the Manson commune knew about the workings of the criminal underworld that was involved with Cielo Drive. So they were actually trying to frame Billy Doyle and Pip Dawson, one of his Confederates, to the point where the police even thought that the famous word pig written in blood on the door of the Polanski said Pick, P-I-C. Pick Dawson was an associate of Billy Doyle. So you need to understand that there was, drug dealing was surrounding these people all the time. But that was a major part of the crime that people just don't seem to grasp. But what they were doing was trying to frame rival drug dealers. When the Cielo Drive robbery turned into murder, they sort of desperately tried to cover it up and make it look like that Billy, and the police actually believed that. They for a while did pursue that. So it was almost a successful framing of them.
Okay, so just so I'm clear on it, what you're saying is that essentially it was Tex Watson's operation. And I guess my big question is, did Charles Manson have anything to do with it before the fact or only after the fact? So was it a case that Tex Watson and the girls got into this dispute, this drug deal gone bad, and then Charlie found out after it happened? Or did he have some sort of preceding involvement? Like, did he send them to go?
Yeah. Let me put that in context. Charles Watson, Tex, or known as Tex, his MO as a criminal, even before he met Charlie, was robbing other drug dealers. That's what he did. He'd go over and rob drug dealers. And as Susan Atkins pointed out in one of her books, a drug dealer can't report you to the Better Business Bureau, or you can't call the cops and say someone robbed me of my drugs. So
it's like Omar from The Wire, the famous character.
Yeah, exactly. It's a very typical criminal profile, a guy who robs drug dealers, and he himself was a drug dealer. So he did this many times. And what happened at Cielo Drive, as I pointed out, Wojtek Frykowski Polanski's friend. He had moved in to the Polanski residence on April Fool's Day of 1969. Polanski was in England making a film. Sharon Tate was in Italy making a film, and Polanski let Frykowski and his girlfriend Abigail Folger move into a guest bedroom there, and Jay Sebring was always hanging around as well. And Frykowski turned his friend's house into an open door drug dealing hangout and was inviting, random people from the street were showing up to buy drugs there, and from Sebring too. So, that was the background of it. And what happened is Kasabian and Watson were burnt, as the terminology has it, by Wojtek Frykowski for $1,000 of MDA, very specific amount. I used to not be clear on whether the drugs that he bought were bad or if they never delivered. And I recently ascertained that Frykowski, for some reason, never delivered this big amount to them. And when the Bobby Beausoleil crime occurred, and Bobby Beausoleil was arrested on August 6th, Charlie was away driving around Pacific Coast Highway on some mysterious errand, right? He was not even around as this was all developing. And Susan Atkins, who was involved with the Beausoleil murder, wanted to be sure that Beausoleil would not stitch on her. So she wanted to hire a lawyer not because she cared so much about him, but to show Beausoleil, who's now in prison, look, we're trying to help you. Don't snitch on me. And so she said, we need to get money. And Linda Kasabian said, in essence, I know some rich pigs up in Beverly Hills that owe us some money. They've got money. That's where we should go. So these girls devised this plan with Tex Watson, who was also burnt with his crime partner, Linda Kasabian, to go there and to get money and drugs. And that was what they were doing. And it was known that there had been a big drug delivery. This was Friday night in Los Angeles, and Jay Sebring and Frykowski, and there were many drug dealers up at Cielo Drive that night, which I explain in my book. I try to explain as much. There's a mysterious Canadian drug dealer named Ian Quarrier, who has been sort of whitewashed and erased from this case, who was very involved with it. But I get into all these complicated details in my book. What it comes down to is they went to avenge a drug burn. It went from what was intended to be a robbery and turned into a murder when Jay Sebring fought back, and various other complications occurred.
Okay. I definitely, I'm going to probably want to have you back if you are available to go into even more detail and talk about your documentary coming up. But I like to always wrap up with, what is the one question that I should have asked you and I didn't? Or as a variant, what is the one question that you've been dealing with this for 30 years and you're waiting for somebody to actually ask you, but they never have?
Mm-hmm. I would say generally that the thing that I think people don't get, the disturbing thing about this is not the crimes themselves. And what I try to get across in the Manson File, and I will even more so in this documentary I'm filming now, the comprehension that the legal establishment, the police, your favorite movie stars, and I mean the top movie stars of the time, including, as I will get into, Cary Grant even is involved in this, your favorite rock stars of the 60s. They lied to you for 50-something years about what happened. And you have been presented with, a tissue of fabrications. I think people don't ask enough about the cover up of this, and what does that say about our society and our journalism and our legal establishment, that this most famous of crimes that, mentioned every day and has become this legendary icon has been completely misreported as something that it is not. And I think that's the important social phenomenon here, is the mafia and the legal establishment and Hollywood colluded to cover up these crimes, and even President Nixon, as I get into in the book, helped to cover up these crimes. Governor Reagan was involved with it. We didn't even get into the mysteries of the LaBianca murders and what that gets into, which I certainly am happy to come back to go. I mean, it's just so complicated.
Right.
It requires a great deal of detail. But yeah, I mean, you did touch on that, but I think in general, maybe when people interview me, they focus more on the crimes, which are rather clear cut. To me, the very disturbing thing is Hollywood, the legal establishment, and the mafia work together to cover this up, and that it is a successful cover up, and that people like Bugliosi and Tom O'Neill continue to spread misinformation, and it's almost like a deliberate effort to mislead people and misdirect them from the truth about this thing. That is what I find far more alarming and concerning. And on a social issue, you've been lied to by the people you're supposed to trust about this thing. The big criminals lied about the little criminals to hide their collusion and involvement in this thing. So that to me is the burning issue that maybe we didn't address enough.
Okay. And I definitely want to get back to that. Now, the book is the Manson File, and there's a link in the description.
Copy, which you have.
Yep, right here. And again, it's a tome.
To each other.
Yes, there's a link in the description so you can go purchase it yourself. It's not light reading, and I definitely want to follow up on more of this. I am extremely interested in the cover up and Bob Evans.
Yeah, we hardly got into the Hollywood connection, the mafia connection. There's so much. I mean, this is more than just the Manson case. The book it gets deep into the shadow side of what American society and Hollywood is really all about. I think that's the important thing. So anyway, it was a pleasure to talk to you.